Morning, gentlemen. Good morning. Okay, so what we were learning yesterday is this halacha that you can confiscate, as a creditor, you can confiscate the personal effects of a debtor in order to collect the loan, including his living place. Ela imkein mochalo halova miritzono mashamochalo. But of course, the creditor does have a right to be benevolent and to be moichel whatever he likes. And what we saw yesterday is that there is an opinion that you have to give him 12 months before you evict him from his premises. Svarim shekana levana v'chein bigdei chol v'chulei. He says, but we said that if a man had purchased svarim for his children, then that's something you cannot collect from. The chol ma shehikna lahen bein svarim uvein begadim harehu ki'ilu machran la'acherim. He says, because whatever you give to your children, if it's already their property, then it's as if you sold it to them, and therefore a creditor cannot confiscate them. And any chattel that has been sold by a debtor cannot be collected by a creditor. That's in contradistinction to real estate. If a person were to divest his real estate after there's already a lien on his property from a loan, a creditor can actually go after the buyers of the real estate, which is why you always do a title search on when you purchase real estate, because if you have to find out, is there any outstanding lien on the real estate? But that's not true with personal effects. With personal effects, and with the truth is with any chattel, not just with personal chattel, but any chattel, there's no title search really that's readily available on chattel, and so therefore a creditor cannot go after those. Aval big day Shabbos yesham degova mehen kilakaman. But there are those who say that a creditor can collect the children's Shabbos clothing. Careful, careful. No, okay. Hold on. That's okay. It's okay. It's not a big deal.
Just because you didn't like what the rabbi was saying, it doesn't mean you have to stop it.
Okay, here we go. Good. But so the question is, why is it that you can collect? The creditor can confiscate the children's Shabbos clothing. That's the creditor. What's the reason why we give him the right to do that? If chattel that's given away to a third party cannot be collected by a creditor. It says, "V'tam hachiluk de begadim yakarim halalu eno makne lahen bistama." He says, because we assume, this is something that Chazal assumed, is that a father does not give this clothing outright to his children. Ella al das she'em yitzarech lahem yikchem miyadam v'yimkarei. You know, this is a reflection on the poverty that existed back in those days. When I buy my son a really expensive bar mitzvah suit, there's something in the back of my mind that says, if I really go into hak, I can always sell the bar mitzvah suit. And so it's not something that a father gives outright to his child. I don't know really what the attitude is. Maybe that's not the attitude in the modern world. But when we buy our children things, I think there's also an attitude, perhaps, that if my child doesn't behave, I can always take away the item. So perhaps it's not a complete gift. And we'll take a look a little bit more about this in the biurim, how we actually paskin. Shalo kanalohu, and then finally the last thing we'll see in the Imrei Yaakov for this seif is big dechol shekana lahem. You cannot confiscate the weekday clothing that a father purchases for his children, but you can confiscate the more expensive clothing. And the same thing is true for the wife. But if the wife acquired her Shabbos clothing from another party, let's say her mother bought her the dress, that cannot be collected on by the creditor. But if the husband bought her Shabbos clothing, there's also something in the back of his mind that says, if I go into Hak, I can always sell my wife's expensive dress. But there are those who disagree. And we will see this shortly. But jewelry is also, a creditor can also collect on a debt from a man's wife's jewelry. Because there again, if I bought my wife jewelry, there's something in the back of my mind that says, if in an emergency, we'll always hock the diamond. Okay, and similarly, a creditor can collect from a man's big day Shabbos, but he has to leave him his big day chol. But he can confiscate his big day Shabbos. So of course, this whole halacha is once again a reflection of an era where people really lived with more basic essentials. But at the same time, it is interesting that a person who goes into debt could have a huge collection of jewelry, collection of scotch, a collection of, I know a lot of people who do this. They collect different things. And so you have to know that a creditor has a right to liquidate all of the assets, virtually all of the assets of the debtor. Okay. Okay. Second, I'm not sure that. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
We spent a bit of time talking about how the lender can't pressure the borrower.
Yes.
To pay. So at some point, how does one, as a lender, go after the borrower's belongings without pressure?
Well, the isser is to pressure someone when you know they don't have.
Oh.
That's the issue.
Oh, when they have this collection, you can just say, okay, it's time to pay up, and I'm going to.
I'm sorry, but I'm not liquid right now. So you say, well, let's go after your alcoholic liquid, right? And let's go after your scotch collection. And the guy says, I can't touch that. That's my kid's Yerusha, or that's my kid's tuition, for Harvard. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. In other words, a debtor doesn't have a right to turn you down and say, I've been saving that for my future. He doesn't have the right to do that. And there's no isser of loyigos, of not oppressing someone, because he has the wherewithal to pay back a debt. Just because he doesn't want to touch it, because he's been saving it for something else, doesn't mean that he has a right to do so. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at some of the likutim. So we saw a little bit. We just saw the first likutim, that a person is obligated to make his Shabbos into a weekday in order to not accept tzedakah. But a person is allowed to borrow money in order to enhance his Shabbos, because Hashem has said that I will pay you back. But as he said in the last line of the Likutim, you should only borrow money to make a nice Shabbos if you know for a fact that you're going to have the wherewithal to pay it back. If you don't have a business plan, if you don't have a plan where you know you're going to get this money from, then even to borrow money to have a nice yanta for Shabbos, you're not permitted to do. Okay. Lahaskir atzmo, that you're not obligated to get a second job or to hire yourself out in order to pay back a debt. The davka priyas chov shehu davar shel mamon she'eno mishtabed kol kach. He says, but note, says the Likutim, that it's only to pay back a debt that you're not obligated to hire yourself out. Avol lishar mitzvos aseh chayev lahaskir atzmo. But for other positive commandments of the Torah, you are obligated to hire yourself out and to earn whatever you can in order to fulfill certain mitzvot. So, for example, let's say a person needs to buy a lulav in esrog, and he just simply doesn't have the money available. He can hire himself out, work as the checkout boy at Sobeys until he earns, the $100 that he needs. Even if it means getting a second job, right? In other words, when it comes to other mitzvot, other than paying back debts, we do require you. The Torah does require you to work harder in order to make more money. And it's a very interesting concept because there is an economic pressure that is placed upon a Jew to be observant. When you think about it, it does boil down to economics. We do require a Jew to make more money in order to be able to fulfill mitzvot. Kosher food is more expensive. Making yontif is expensive. Now, it doesn't have to be as expensive as we make it, right? A person can get by with very little. You don't have to have meat at every meal on Pesach. You can have potatoes and vegetables, right? And get by on a very meager menu over Pesach, and you don't have to feed all of your cousins either. But the basics, as far as the acquisition of matzah, we are lenient also with people who don't have enough money, that they are allowed to use regular matzah instead of shmura matzah, if a person doesn't have means in order to be able to afford, or certainly the machine shmura matzah over the hand shmura matzah, right? But there is an economic factor, and at a certain point, we would tell a person who wants to be observant but can't afford it that maybe you should try looking at a different job market than the one that you're currently in, so that you can make a living wage. Okay, and that's certainly why a lot of Jews go into more lucrative careers instead of maybe the blue market, the blue collar market. But there's nothing wrong with being a blue collar worker and making just a regular salary. Yeah, well, it depends. It depends what you go into. Mihu im tzarech lahaskir atzma ba'ofen shebizayon lo. Let's say the only way that you can make enough money to do certain mitzvot is if you do something that is degrading. Yesh ladun mishem kavod habrios b'shev v'altase. There is, the Chazon Ish says that one would need to deliberate over this shaila, because your failure to perform the mitzvah is a passive violation. It's not an active violation. So we may not require you to do something that would perhaps be degrading to your status within the community. So maybe to become a checkout boy, after you just got shishi and shul this past Shabbos, and then people are going to come to Sobeys and see you bagging groceries. Maybe that's not it. Maybe that's not according to your honor. That's a possibility. Yeah, I mean, to do it for yourself, you're right. It's no big deal, right? Anyway, uve'el yoraba kosta b'shem ha'Yerushalmi depeya de'ein mechuyev lachzor al b'shem ha'Yerushalmi depeya de'ein mechuyev lachzor al psachim k'dei liknos tefillin v'tzitzis. You're not obligated. The Eliyah Rabbah writes that you're not obligated to beg for tzedakah money in order to purchase tefillin and tzitzis. You're not obligated to go and beg for tzedakah for that. Ulam b'bir halacha hisig al zeh v'tama. However, the Bir Halacha, the Mishnah Berurah, disagrees with the Eliyah Rabbah, and he says the Kaimalan de Liner Shabbos Shol Al Psachim, that for Shabbos candles you have to beg in order to be able to have Shabbos candles. Va'ayin sham demasik da afilu im tim tzalomer de ein mechuyev lachsa al psachim lahasig mos liknos tefillin aval al kolpanim mechuyev lachsa ulevakesh mi Yisrael sheyashel tefillin l'kaima mitzvahs asay ayin sham. So the Mishnah Berurah's conclusion is, number one, maybe you do have to go and beg. And even if you're going to argue that you don't have to beg, but you at least have to make every effort to borrow tefillin and tzitzis from other Jews so that you have what to fulfill the mitzvah. So we get off on this topic because what we're discussing is how far does a person have to go to pay back his debts after he's liquidated all of his assets and he still can't pay back the debt. So we learned in this halacha that paying back debts does not require you to work additional hours. You work the normal number of hours you can, and you're not obligated to become a slave to this debt. But you are obligated to become a slave to other mitzvahs. Okay, and that's really the point that we're making over here. Okay. The next thing that we learned is that any money that the debtor acquires has to be used to service the debt, as long as it's not being used for the essential needs. So Reuven sheno shemana b'Shimon b'Levi. So we learned that we saw a little bit of this in the Imrei Yaakov. Reuven is Shimon's creditor. So Shimon owes Reuven 100. And Levi owes Shimon 100. So this is Rabbi Nassan's chiddush in the Gemara. Lotziin mi Levi v'nostin l'Reuven. We can extract, the Beis Din can order Levi to pay Reuven directly and circumvent Shimon. So basically, what that means is that Reuven, who's the first creditor, can actually circumvent. Can even go to Shimon's debtors to collect on Shimon's debt to him. Lo shna im nischayev lo kfar l'Shimon b'shah shalav Reuven, lo shna im nischayev lo achar kach, and it makes no difference the timing of the debt. Even if it doesn't matter if Levi already owed the money at the time when Shimon's debt was due, or whether Levi owes the money after Shimon's debt became due, it doesn't make a difference. And it also doesn't make a difference whether it's a loan that is in writing, in a promissory note, or if it's just an oral loan that is acknowledged by witnesses. Because since everyone is acknowledging Levi owes money, Shimon owes money, then Reuven can go directly to Levi and circumvent Shimon. This is known in the Sfarim as the lien of Rebbe Nassan, where basically it's like a transitive property. The Shibura de Rebbe Nassan, who Shibud Haguf, ve'ein sarach Beis Din. And not only that, but you don't even need to go to Beis Din in order to collect it, but rather v'yochel hamal va'atzmo litvoa me'achayv l'lo v'shelo. As a matter of fact, Reuven, like if we're all from guys, and I go to Shimon and he says, I'm not liquid, I can't pay you back. So Reuven doesn't even have to consult with the Beis Din. He can directly go to Levi, who he knows owes Shimon money, and say, Levi, I'm here to collect the debt that you owe to Shimon because Shimon owes me money. Shimon would, of course, have to acknowledge this before Levi releases the money. So Shimon would have to acknowledge it would have to be done with witnesses and so forth. Probably advisable to sign off on this, right? But it doesn't require a Beis Din in order to enact this. You can just do this casually. Okay.
the borrower's employer.
Like to garnish wages. Yeah. It's possible. It's possible. Although, you probably would need the order of a beis din or of a court in order to be entitled to do that. Because unless you have permission from the debtor himself to go ahead and who authorizes his boss to pay it. If not, because what if the debtor claims my paycheck, I use that to buy groceries? Yeah. So how can you just take that? I'm going to starve. I won't be able to pay my rent. Yeah. So so something would have to be negotiated. When they garnish wages, it's not they take the whole paycheck, right? It's they take a portion of the paycheck. So that would probably have to be worked out in a beis din, I would imagine. Yeah. Yeah. So that's why probably it has to be worked out by a beis din. It's a very valid question. Okay. The next thing we want to see is where are we in? Okay. Kedei siddur shemisradim lebal chov, that any additional assets that are not essential, any chattel that is not essential, that the beis din would be able to determine is not considered to be essential. Chayav liten hakol lahamalva, right? You have to give over to the malva. So, like, remember, we learned, like, leave the guy the basic needs of like a bed, a table, some chairs, right? But all the other personal effects, all of his artwork and so forth, you can confiscate. Reuven shenis chayiv l'shimon sach mamon l'zman yadua, va'asa Reuven al atzmo basar v'yayin im lo yifra l'shimon ba'al chov l'zman hanizkar. So here, Reuven is the debtor in this example. He owes Shimon money, and he took a vow that he's not going to eat meat or wine until he pays back Shimon his debt. If he says, if I don't pay you back by such and such a date, I will not eat meat or drink wine. V'higia hazman umato yad Shimon ve'en lo acher kedei siddur bal chov. And then the time came, v'higia hazman umato yad Shimon ve'en lo acher kedei siddur bal chov yishal al nidro mipnei shlosha v'yatiru lo. And I guess what you should do, get a hataras nedarim. This is what I think he's saying. Im yesh lo chob sha'acherim chayavim lo tzarech iyun im nomar legabos mimenu hakol v'halo v'yigba kedei mechiyasa mibal chov shalo odil yesh lachosh pen lichal legabos mimenu chovo. I'm not really sure I understand this halacha. Al kedei siddur shemisradim lebal chov chayv litin hakol lahamalva. Okay. Shimon ve'en lo acher. I'll have to figure out what this means. I'm sorry, I don't know what this means. Ba'afilu Sefer Torah, and even he has to, if he owns a Sefer Torah, he has to sell the Sefer Torah in order to pay back his debt, which is a shocking thing because we don't normally permit the sale of a Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah shehuchnas lahechel beis hakneses, and then remember we talked about this idea about a Sefer Torah that is dedicated to the shul, bistama, and it was donated without any stipulation. Va'amad sham b'meshech hazman, and it's been there in the shul for years. V'achar kach rotza habal habayis lakachto misham, and then the person who dedicated the Sefer Torah says, I'm making aliyah, I want to take my Sefer Torah with me. So minhag ha'olam shemikilin bazeh. He says the minhag is that we do permit the balabayas to take his Sefer Torah. Because it's as if there was a stipulation that we would not allow hektish to set in on this Sefer Torah, so that it does not become communal property. But it is proper at the outset to stipulate that you are not giving this outright to the shul. There should be some documentation that says very clearly that this Sefer Torah the ownership is retained by the dedicator, because you want to be able to make sure that no one can argue afterwards. I had a situation, a person from our shul recently made aliyah, and they had many years ago given a family Sefer Torah to a certain shul, not ours, but a certain shul that perhaps we could say is known for being very financially savvy, shall we say. And when he decided to make aliyah, the person said, no, you dedicated this Sefer Torah. It has value to us. If you want it, you gotta pay for it. And the guy said, well, let me give you a replacement. And the rabbi said to him, well, it's got to be of equivalent value. This is a very rare Sefer Torah with special writing that comes from, the late 19th century, and it's written in a certain style. We're not going to just let you replace it with a few $1,000 used Sefer Torah. This is a very special Sefer Torah. So it's going to Beis Din, right? Very, very, very interesting that, obviously there's got to be menschlichkeit also. If it's clear that, that's why it's good to have documentation, because sometimes you can be dealing with starkers and hard-nosed people who are very reluctant to part with anything of value, even when it's fairly clear that this was a family effect. But if you're dedicating something to a shul, make sure you have documentation. Well, it would certainly stand to reason that if a person has a debt to the shul does have a right to collect on the debt from that person's Sefer Torah. That's what we just learned, that a person has to sell their Sefer Torah in order to make good on a debt. The question is, yeah, I don't see why not. I don't see why a shul should be disadvantaged. A shul is a communal entity, and if they extended credit to someone, that person has a debt that they have to pay to the shul should be able to turn to the person and say, you didn't pay what you owed us for the last 3 years. You've accrued a debt that you acknowledge by not paying your membership and benefiting from the shul. So 3 years not paying membership, $7,500. Your family Sefer Torah is probably worth that or a little bit more. So we'll exchange. We'll do an exchange. The person may jump up and down, but the shul may have a right to do that and even take the guy to Beis Din. The question is it advisable to do that in every situation? They have to weigh Okay. One second, let me just finish this. If a person gave a gift to his child and gave him all of his svarim, if a man says, I hereby give you all my svarim, is a Sefer Torah included in that declaration of a gift? This is a machlokas haposkim. Very, very tangential to our discussion, but nonetheless, we've grouped them all together, Sfarim and Sifrei Torah. But the fact of the matter is that a person views Sfarim somewhat differently from a Sefer Torah. So maybe we'll do some of the Burim tomorrow and then we'll move on. Okay, Have a good day, everybody.